I have always been skeptical about ghosts or haunted house stories. To me, these reports were nothing more than inventions created to impress or scare. As a content creator on YouTube, I knew that paranormal topics sparked curiosity and generated engagement, so I invested in them. It was with this mindset that I faced the anonymous message I received, suggesting the investigation of an old abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. According to local reports, the house had a dark history. An entire family mysteriously disappeared there decades ago, leaving no traces behind. With cameras loaded and flashlights ready, I went to the location, believing I would find just another setting for an intriguing video. Little did I know, that night would be one of the most terrifying of my life. As I approached the rusted gate, the place seemed harmless, almost ordinary. The worn facade, covered in moss, and the absence of any lighting created a classic scene of abandonment. The smell of rotting wood mixed with the damp air, while cobwebs accumulated in every corner. The front door was ajar, as if waiting for me, inviting and threatening at the same time. I decided to start recording before entering, narrating every detail for my audience. The inside of the house was exactly as expected: thick dust covering furniture, creaky steps with every move, and an unsettling silence that seemed to intensify every sound. But something was out of place, an oppressive silence, almost unnatural, that seemed to swallow even the faintest noises, like my breath. As I walked through the main room, something caught my attention. The floor, covered in a thin layer of dust, was marked with deep grooves, as if heavy furniture had been dragged recently. My instinct told me this didn't make sense in a house that had been abandoned for decades. I tried to rationalize. Maybe they were traces left by curious visitors or some past event. But the oddness didn't stop there. As I moved down the dark corridors, the feeling of being watched grew. The camera trembled slightly in my hands, and the flashlight seemed unable to fully illuminate the dark corners. Something in that house seemed alive, as if the very structure was breathing and moving, watching every step I took. As I explored the dusty rooms, a muffled sound caught my attention. It was coming from upstairs, resembling dragging footsteps, as if someone or something was walking slowly. The sound was subtle, but impossible to ignore in that oppressive silence. With the flashlight trembling in my hands and my heart racing, I began to climb the stairs. Each step creaked too loudly, as if betraying my presence. At the top, a bedroom door was ajar, and the sound seemed to be coming from there. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached. With the camera pointed forward, I slowly pushed the door open. The room was empty, but something seemed out of place. As I looked into the dusty mirror on the vanity, my body froze. Reflected in the glass was a silhouette standing behind me. I spun around automatically, but there was no one there. Fear began to settle in, but I forced myself to continue. I remembered that all of this was being recorded, and any reaction, no matter how genuine, would be great for the video. However, the atmosphere felt increasingly hostile. As I walked back down the hallway, something even stranger happened. A door that had previously been completely shut was now open. It revealed a steep staircase leading down to a dark basement, one I hadn't even noticed before. A cold wave ran down my spine as I stared at the black hole before me. Against all my instincts, I decided to go down. Perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of the obligation to keep recording, but something was pulling me toward that basement. When I reached the bottom, the scene I found was disturbing. The concrete floor was covered in old photographs, scattered as if they had been thrown on purpose. I picked one up and saw the smiling face of a family on what appeared to be a happy day. The photos were clearly of the family that had disappeared there decades ago. But then, something made me freeze completely. Among the family pictures, another photo caught my attention. It was of me, a clear, recent photo of myself, taken from an angle I had never seen. The worst part? I had never taken that photo. Holding the image, a chill ran through my body, and the feeling that I was not alone became unbearable. That's when I heard the whisper. A low voice, almost imperceptible, that seemed to cut through the silence like a cold blade. It was calling my name. Leave, while you can. It was a sound that came from all directions and none at the same time, echoing in an impossible way. My instincts screamed for me to get out of there, but my body was frozen. Suddenly, the flashlight began to flicker, briefly illuminating the basement with disturbing flashes. Then the camera died, and darkness took over the space. The air became dense, as if the very surroundings were suffocating me. When I tried to move, my feet felt glued to the floor, and the sensation of being trapped grew with every passing second. Then I felt something touch my shoulder, a hand as cold as ice. Before I could react, an invisible force shoved me violently, and when I regained my balance, I was outside the house, with the gates locked behind me as if they had never been opened. That moment was enough to make me swear never to explore paranormal themes again. The terror I felt escaping that house was incomparable, but it was only the beginning. That night, when reviewing the footage, the inexplicable happened. Despite clearly remembering that the camera had turned off in the basement, the last few minutes were recorded. I watched the video with my heart in my throat, seeing the scene in the basement through the trembling lens. Slowly, a dark figure began to emerge from the shadows, moving towards me. It approached slowly, as if savoring each second, until its presence dominated the screen. The moment it seemed to be only inches from the camera, the image went completely black. I couldn't identify what it was, but its mere existence was enough to reopen the fear I thought I had left behind. Since then, my life has never been the same. Even in the safety of my home, I feel that something is watching me. It's a constant presence, invisible, but impossible to ignore. The most disturbing thing, however, is the video. Every time I try to delete it from my computer, it reappears as if it's impossible to erase. I've changed devices, formatted the disk, and even tried to destroy it in various ways, but the file persists. It's as if it has a will of its own, refusing to disappear. Sometimes, I hear the same whisper from that night in the silence of my house, and fear consumes me, thinking that perhaps I brought something from that house with me, something that doesn't want to be forgotten. It all started as just another routine investigation for my channel, but the story that awaited me was anything but ordinary. I received countless messages about an abandoned farm hidden in the depths of the countryside, a place shrouded in dark mysteries. They said that, during the slavery period, indescribable tragedies took place there, haunting the location for generations. The locals spoke of curses and swore that no one could spend an entire night on the farm without fleeing in terror. For a YouTuber specialized in paranormal investigations, it seemed like the perfect setting. I prepared my equipment, grabbed my camera, and invited a loyal friend to accompany me. Our goal was clear: to record the events and uncover what truly lay behind the legends. However, I was far from imagining that night would become a turning point in my life. When we arrived, the sight of the main house was chilling. The crumbling walls seemed to be fighting against time, while the sound of our footsteps echoed across the worn wooden floor, as if the house itself were protesting our presence. The smell of mold and decay was almost suffocating, filling the air with an invisible weight. We decided to begin filming as soon as twilight plunged the place into complete darkness. In the beginning, everything was eerily calm, to the point that I started to believe it would be an uneventful investigation. But then, out of nowhere, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps from upstairs. Without hesitation, we slowly made our way up, with the camera recording every movement, our hearts pounding. What we found was a dark hallway, with half-open doors that seemed to be watching us. On the dusty floor, we saw the marks of footprints leading to the end of the hall, where a slightly open door awaited us. With each step, the tension grew, and the silence seemed to transform into a deafening sound. When we reached the last door, a violent bang paralyzed us. It slammed shut on its own with an inexplicable force, even though the night was completely still. We felt as though something was watching us closely, but there was no one there. The chill that ran down our spines wasn't just from the weather. It felt as if the very farm itself wanted to expel us. From that moment on, we knew this investigation would not be like any other we had ever done. We decided to enter the room, despite our racing hearts and the feeling that something invisible was watching us. The space seemed like an old maid's quarters. A rusted bed lay in the center, with chains attached to the mold-covered walls. The air was suffocating and cold, as if the very room was infused with some ancient evil. No camera could capture that oppressive presence, but it was undeniable. As I was inspecting the area, I turned to speak to my friend, but he was no longer behind me. My heart raced even faster when I realized he hadn't left without me noticing. I called out for him several times, but the only response was a terrifying silence. I rushed out into the hallway, now enveloped in an even denser darkness, but it was empty. Then I heard his voice coming from downstairs, though the sound was strange, almost distorted, as if it wasn't really him. I hurried down the stairs, guided by that disturbing call, and found him in the main room, standing with his back to me, completely motionless. Something was wrong. His posture was rigid, unnatural. As I got closer, he turned his head in an impossible way, as if he had no bones, revealing completely white eyes and a sinister grin. He was muttering something incomprehensible, a mix of words that didn't sound human. My survival instinct screamed louder, and I ran out of the house trying to catch my breath and sanity. But the terror didn't stay behind. As I tried to move away, I heard the metallic sound of chains being dragged, getting closer. I looked at the windows and saw shapeless shadows moving unnaturally. That's when I remembered, horrified, that my keys were in my backpack, left in the main room. Overcome by an almost paralyzing fear, but with no other choice, I ran back inside the house. I grabbed the backpack as quickly as I could, feeling the invisible gaze of the house weighing on me. I was almost out when something froze my movements. A low, muffled sound, but clearly human, echoed from the basement. It was crying, weak and suffering like that of a child. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run out of there, but curiosity, or perhaps something stronger, pushed me toward the source of that sound. Each step toward the basement door was a battle against my survival instinct. But the thought of discovering what was truly happening down there drove me forward, even knowing that nothing good awaited me below. The basement was a tangible nightmare, as if it concentrated all the evil of that place. The air was heavy, impregnated with a strong metallic smell, reminiscent of old blood and decay. Each step made the floor creak, and the sound seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. At the back of the basement, my eyes fixed on something that made my heart race. An improvised altar, with extinguished candles arranged in a circle, surrounded by deep scratch marks on the walls, as if someone had desperately fought to escape. In the center, a thick chain still attached to the floor swung on its own, emitting an ominous sound that echoed through the darkness. Before I could react, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, plunging me into absolute darkness. With trembling hands, I lit the flashlight, and immediately, the silence was replaced by a low, almost inaudible whisper that seemed to come from all directions. It was a strange, incomprehensible language, but filled with malice that made my blood run cold. The whispers grew louder, and it felt like something invisible was approaching. Summoning all the strength I had left, I ran toward the door and pushed with all my energy. When I finally managed to get out, stumbling out into the night, I found my friend standing on the lawn in front of the house. His face was pale, his eyes completely empty, as if he was trapped in some distant place. I asked what had happened, but he didn't answer. He just stood there, motionless like a statue, until we finally decided to leave without saying another word. After that night, I couldn't deal with what the recordings had captured. I deleted everything, unable to watch or relive the horror we experienced. Still, the memories are etched in my mind, and the feeling that the farm was not only haunted, but a place where the suffering and violence of the past remained alive, haunts me to this day. My friend disappeared a few days later, leaving no trace. I never told anyone this story, but on nights of absolute silence, sometimes I hear sounds that shouldn't be there, chains dragging and distorted whispers murmuring my name. It's a constant reminder that some doors, literally, should never be opened.